She was wearing my robe. That's the detail I keep coming back to. Not the texts, not the 2 years of gaslighting, not the way they both looked at me across the Thanksgiving table like I was the unstable one for asking why he was always helping Mom with the yard on Saturday mornings. No, what I cannot get out of my head, even now, even standing on the other side of all of it, is that she was wearing my robe, the white one, with the fraying cuff on the left sleeve that I kept meaning to replace, but never did. She was wearing it at my kitchen counter, making coffee in my kitchen, in my house, like she had simply always lived there. And in a way, she had. My name is irrelevant. What matters is this. I was 44 years old. I had been married for 11 years, and the woman pouring herself coffee in my kitchen, comfortable, unhurried, barefoot on my tile, was my mother. Let that breathe for a moment. Not a neighbor, not a coworker, not some woman he'd met at a conference bar and convinced himself meant nothing. My mother. The woman who drove me to my first therapy appointment after my miscarriage. The woman who helped me pick out my wedding dress. The woman who once sat across from me over bad wine and said, with complete conviction, "You found a good one. I can always tell." She could always tell. I need you to understand who my mother was before I tell you what she became, or maybe what she had always been and I had simply never been willing to see. Patricia was 61 years old, recently widowed. My father had passed 18 months prior, a cardiac event, mercifully quick. She was sharp, elegant in that particular way of women who learned early that beauty was currency and spent their whole lives investing wisely. She had opinions about everything and softened none of them. She had never once apologized for anything she had actually meant. Growing up, I was her project, not in the loving, attentive way, in the architectural way. She designed me, reviewed me, sent me back for renovations when I didn't meet spec. I learned very young that her love was conditional, though she would have called it high standards. I spent most of my 20s in therapy unlearning her voice in my head, but she was still my mother, and when my father died, I pulled her close. Because that's what you do. Because she was grieving. Because I am, and this is the wound my husband knew exactly how to press, I am someone who does not abandon people, even the ones who have never quite shown up for me. My husband understood that about me from the beginning. Marcus, 47, contractor. The kind of man who presents as steady and turns out to be a slow leak. The damage is already catastrophic by the time you find the source. He had always been attentive to my mother. I thought it was kindness. I thought it was the quality I had married him for, that particular warmth he had with people he was trying to impress. He called her Pat. She hated when anyone called her Pat. She never told him to stop. The Saturday mornings began about 4 months after my father's funeral. "She's alone," he'd say, "just checking in, making sure she's not rattling around that house by herself." He'd come back smelling like her perfume, Chanel No. 5, She'd worn it my entire life, and I told myself it transferred. I told myself fabric, hugs, close quarters. I told myself the story that kept my world intact. I told myself that story for 14 months. Here's what I want you to hold on to right now. Not the betrayal. You already understand the shape of that. What I want you to hold is this. I had already started to know. Somewhere deep in the body, in that place that processes truth before the brain is ready to accept it, I already knew. The questions I didn't ask, the receipts I didn't look at, the way I started scheduling Sunday dinners at her house instead of ours, without consciously understanding why I didn't want them in my space together. My nervous system was protecting me, collecting data, waiting. And that is precisely why, when the moment finally came, I was not caught off guard. I was ready. Now, if you want to know what I found, what I did with it, and why my mother's attorney later described the outcome as unusually thorough, stay right here. Hit subscribe. Tap the bell. Because around here, we don't miss a single chapter. And this one? This one does not end the way either of them planned. Let's keep going. Let me tell you about the 14 months before I walked into my own kitchen and found her in my robe. Because the betrayal didn't start that morning. It never starts at the moment you discover it. It starts in the small surrenders, the ones that feel like grace at the time. When my father died, I became two women simultaneously. The daughter who was grieving her own complicated grief, because losing a parent you had a difficult relationship with is its own specific kind of unresolved. And the wife who was trying to hold everyone else together while quietly coming apart. Marcus stepped into that gap, or I believed he did. He was present in the way I needed him to be present, calm, logistical, handling the funeral home calls and the death certificate paperwork and the notifications to my father's pension office. He did what I could not do. I was grateful in the way that exhausted, grieving women are grateful, completely and without scrutiny. Gratitude is a beautiful thing. It is also, in the wrong hands, a blindfold. My mother's grief was performative in the way that everything about Patricia was performative. She wore black for 6 weeks. She received visitors like a dignitary. She cried at appropriate intervals and stopped crying with a precision that, even then, I found slightly unnerving. What she did not do, what she had never done in my memory, was sit alone with herself and feel the weight of something without an audience. So Marcus became the audience. He would go to her on Saturdays, come home by early afternoon, report back dutifully. She's doing better this week. She started going through your father's study. She asked if we wanted his golf clubs. And I absorbed each update like a woman reading a weather report for a city she wasn't traveling to. I had my own grief. I had my own work. I had the particular loneliness of being the person everyone else leans on, with no one checking whether or not I was still standing. I was still standing, but I was standing alone. The first thing I noticed was the shift in how Marcus talked about her. It was subtle enough that I could dismiss it, and I did, repeatedly, because I am good at dismissing things I am not ready to face. But the language changed. It softened. He stopped calling her your mother, and started calling her Pat, and then sometimes, in moments he didn't realize I was tracking, just she. As in, she thinks we should come for dinner Sunday. Not your mother, not Patricia, just she. The intimate pronoun, the one you use for someone whose name your mouth already knows too well to bother with. I noticed. I filed it. I moved on. The second thing I noticed was her behavior toward me. Patricia had always been critical, architecturally critical, as I said, but there was a new quality to it now, a distance that felt less like disapproval and more like guilt management. She stopped offering opinions on my hair, my career, my choices. She started being careful with me. Patricia had never been careful with me a single day in my life. The carefulness was the tell I didn't know how to read yet. What I understand now, sitting on the other side of it, is that she had already started lying to me by then. Every careful sentence was a redirection. Every softened visit was a performance designed to keep me from looking too closely. She was managing me, the way you manage someone who is standing near something you don't want them to see. My mother was stage managing her own daughter to cover an affair with that daughter's husband. And Marcus was letting her do it. More than letting her, he was coordinating it. I know that now because of what I found in the cloud backup, but that comes later. That comes after the robe. That comes after the morning I finally stopped managing my own suspicions and simply walked in. I had forgotten my laptop. It sounds almost embarrassingly ordinary. A Tuesday morning in March. I'd driven 8 minutes to the office, realized I didn't have it, turned around. I didn't call ahead. I had no reason to call ahead. I was going to my own house. I used my key. She didn't hear me come in. Neither did he. I stood in the hallway for a moment, 10 seconds, maybe 15, and in that stillness, I heard my entire marriage rearranging itself into a shape I would never be able to unsee. And then I made a decision that changed everything that came after. I did not say a word. I want you to hold on to that, the silence I chose in that hallway, because she was going to spend the next 3 months believing she had gotten away with it. She had not gotten away with anything. I put my laptop under my arm and I walked back out the front door. I locked it behind me, quietly. The way you close a door when there's a sleeping child in the next room. The way you move when you understand, bone deep, that the most powerful thing you can do right now is leave no evidence that you were ever there. I sat in my car for 11 minutes. I know it was 11 minutes because I watched the clock. Not because I was timing myself, because I needed something numerical to hold on to while the world I had built over 11 years quietly dissolved through the windshield in front of me. And then I did something that Patricia and Marcus, and frankly, most people who have never been pushed to their absolute limit, would never have predicted. I drove to work. I answered emails. I sat through a 11 o'clock meeting about Q2 projections. I ate half a sandwich at my desk. I did not cry. I did not call my best friend. I did not text Marcus a single word. I simply functioned. Because I had learned something in that hallway. Something cold and clarifying, and, in its own way, almost peaceful. They did not know that I knew. And that gap, that precise, fragile window between their certainty and my silence, was the most valuable thing I had ever owned. I am a project manager by profession. I have spent 20 years breaking complex, high-stakes problems into phases, dependencies, and deliverables. I understand resourcing. I understand timelines. I understand that the people who win are not the ones who react the fastest. They are the ones who define the scope before anyone else realizes the project has begun. I opened a new document that afternoon. I titled it Renovation. I thought that was funny, given the circumstances. What went into that document over the next 79 days would eventually be described by my attorney as one of the most organized discovery files she had seen from a non-professional. But I am getting ahead of myself, because before the attorney, before the document, before any of it, there was the architecture of what I was actually dealing with. I needed to understand the full shape of the betrayal before I could respond to any of it. Because responding to the surface, the affair, the grotesque intimacy of it, the specific person involved, would have been satisfying for approximately 48 hours and strategically ruinous afterward. I did not want 48 hours of satisfaction. I wanted the rest of my life restructured in my favor. So I started at the beginning, which meant I started with the money. Here is something I had not allowed myself to look at carefully during our marriage. Marcus controlled our finances. Not because I was incapable. I am demonstrably extremely capable. But because early in our relationship, he had positioned himself as the one who was good with numbers, and I had accepted that framing without examining it. Another thing Patricia had trained me to do without realizing it. Accept the roles assigned to me by people who needed me in a specific position to maintain their own advantage. I requested 6 months of statements from every account I could access. What I found in the first week was not yet explosive, but it was a map. Small transfers to an account I didn't recognize. Regular, timed, always on a Friday, always the same amount, always categorized in our budgeting software under a label so mundane I had scrolled past it for over a year without registering it. Home maintenance. He had been funneling money to my mother for 14 months under the category of home maintenance. I sat with that for a long time, because what it told me was not just that they were involved. I already knew that, in the most visceral possible way. What it told me was the timeline. The transfers started 3 months after my father's funeral, 6 weeks, roughly, after the Saturday visits began. Which meant this was not a grief-adjacent mistake that spiraled out of control. This was a decision, made early, Made deliberately. Made while I was sitting Shiva in my childhood home, and Marcus was making phone calls on my behalf, and Patricia was receiving condolences in black. They were already choosing each other while I was burying my father. I want you to feel the weight of that for a moment. Not because I need you to be angry for me, though if you are, I understand, but because the timeline matters for what comes next. Legally, documentably, consequentially. The timeline is not just an emotional wound. The timeline is evidence. I screenshot everything. I exported statements. I created a separate encrypted folder, not on our shared cloud, not on any device that touched our home network. I bought a cheap laptop with cash. I am a project manager. I understand data hygiene. And I had 79 days while they believed I was simply their good, unsuspecting woman. Going to work, coming home, making dinner occasionally, asking after her in the tone of a devoted daughter. I called her every Sunday, like always, listened to her talk about the garden, asked how she was sleeping, told her I loved her before I hung up. I said, "I love you, Mom," 57 times while building the file that would dismantle her. I counted. I need to pause here for just 1 second, because if you are watching this and something in your chest just went very, very quiet, you are not alone. Drop a burning fire emoji in the comments if you have ever had to smile at someone who was actively betraying you because you knew that your composure was your greatest weapon. I see you. I see exactly what that costs. Okay, now, where were we? Right, the will. My father was not a wealthy man, but he was a precise one. He had grown up with nothing, the specific nothing of a family that had been quietly poor for so long they had mistaken it for dignity. And that upbringing had made him meticulous about the things he did accumulate. The house, a modest investment account, a life insurance policy he had maintained without interruption for 31 years, and a will, drafted and updated every 5 years with the fidelity of a man who understood that paperwork was the only language the world was legally obligated to respect. He had updated that will 8 months before he died. I knew this because he had told me. Sitting at his kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon, coffee going cold between us, he had said, in the offhand way he said everything important, like he was reading from a grocery list, "I redid the paperwork this spring. You're taken care of. I want you to know that." And I had nodded and changed the subject because I was 43 years old and I was not ready to sit with my father's mortality at a kitchen table on a Sunday. I should have asked more questions. I know that now. What I did not know then, what none of us knew then, or so I believed, was that 8 months after that conversation, 3 weeks after my father's funeral, my mother had contacted his estate attorney. Alone. She told the attorney that my father had expressed a desire in his final months to amend certain provisions, that he had discussed it with her, that the distribution she was requesting reflected his true intentions, which the existing document, due to timing, due to his declining health, had simply failed to capture. She was contesting her own husband's will. from inside the grief, while accepting condolences, while wearing black. The attorney, and this is where my father's precision saved me from beyond whatever comes after. The attorney had kept notes, detailed notes, because he was an old-fashioned man who did not trust memory and did not trust people who arrived at his office without appointments requesting amendments to documents belonging to recently deceased clients. He had noted the date of her visit, the nature of her request, the specific language she used, and he had declined to make any changes, citing proper procedure and a waiting period he was not legally required to impose, but imposed anyway. He had also, quietly, flagged the file. I found this out on day 41 of my 79 days. I found it because I did something I had never thought to do during my father's lifetime. I called his attorney myself. I introduced myself. I asked, calmly and professionally, for a copy of the existing will for my own estate planning records. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, in the careful tone of a man choosing his words with surgical precision, "I think it would be worth your while to come in." I went in the next morning. What he showed me across that desk, the notes, the flagged file, the specific provisions my mother had attempted to alter, rearranged everything I thought I understood about the timeline. Because the provision she had tried to change was not about the house. It was not about the investment account. It was about me. My father, in his final update, had created a specific protected distribution. A portion of the estate, not enormous but meaningful, the accumulated careful savings of a man who had grown up with nothing, set aside specifically for his daughter. Not to be commingled with marital assets, not accessible to any spouse, current or future. A direct line, from his hands to mine, with language so deliberate the attorney told me it was the clearest protective clause he'd drafted in 30 years. My father had known something, not about Marcus and Patricia. I don't believe that. But about Patricia. About the way she moved through the world. About what happened to things she felt she was owed. He had known his wife in the way that long married people know each other. Not through conversation, but through pattern. And somewhere in the quietest part of himself, he had built a wall around his daughter. He could not protect me from the marriage, but he protected what he could. I sat in that attorney's office for 2 hours. When I left, I had 2 things I had not walked in with. The first was a certified copy of the existing will, with every provision intact and dated. The second was the attorney's personal agreement to serve as a witness, should it become necessary, regarding the nature of my mother's post-funeral visit. Day 41. And the file was becoming something extraordinary. But here is what I need you to understand about those 79 days, about what it costs to move through your own life as a woman who is building a case while simultaneously performing normalcy. I still came home to Marcus. I still slept in our bed, on my side, with 6 inches of mattress between us that felt like a continent. I still asked about his day. I still passed him the salt. I had become, without planning it, the most method actress of my own life. And he suspected nothing. Because men like Marcus, men who have decided you are manageable, stop watching you carefully the moment they believe they have gotten away with something. His guard was down. He was, in the way of people who believe they are the smartest person in any room they walk into, completely relaxed. He left his phone on the kitchen counter on day 63. Unlocked, face up, a notification visible on the screen. Her name. Not Mom, not Patricia. A single letter. The kind of contact name you assign when you need deniability, but can't quite bring yourself to delete the thread. He walked back into the kitchen 11 seconds later and picked it up. I was at the stove. I did not look up. I stirred whatever was in the pot and said, "Dinner in 20," in the voice of a woman who had seen nothing. I had seen everything. And on day 79, a Wednesday, unremarkable in every external way, I picked up the phone and called a family law attorney whose name had been sitting in a notes app on my cash laptop since day 4. Her name was Renata. She had a reputation in our city that I can only describe as the attorney you call when you need someone who does not flinch. I told her I had a file. She asked me to describe it. There was a pause on her end that I will remember for the rest of my life. And then she said, very quietly, "How soon can you come in?" Renata's office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown that had the particular quiet of a place where serious things were decided. No soft music in the waiting room. No decorative bowls of candy on the reception desk. Just clean lines, good lighting, and the faint sound of a city that did not know what was about to happen to 2 specific people within it. She met me at the door herself. That was the first thing I noticed. Attorneys who meet you at the door have already decided you are worth their full attention. I put the file on her desk. Printed, tabbed, indexed. 61 pages covering 79 days of documentation. Bank records, transfer histories, the estate attorney's flagged notes, screenshots organized chronologically, a timeline I had built in a spreadsheet that cross-referenced Marcus's phone location data, which I had legal access to through our shared family plan, against the transfer dates and the Saturday visits. Renata did not speak for a long time. When she did, she said, "You built this yourself." It was not a question. I told her I was a project manager. She looked at me over the file with an expression I can only describe as professional satisfaction. The look of a woman who has spent 20 years cleaning up other people's messes and has just been handed, for once, a situation that arrived pre-organized. She walked me through what we had. The financial transfers, documented over 14 months, constituted what she described as dissipation of marital assets. Marcus had been systematically moving money to my mother, money that belonged to our marital estate, without my knowledge or consent. In our state, that is not simply a moral failing. It is a quantifiable, recoverable loss in divorce proceedings. Every transfer, every Friday, every dollar labeled home maintenance for a home that was not ours.
We also had the estate matter, my mother's post-funeral visit to my father's attorney, her attempt to alter provisions specifically designed to protect me, constituted what Renata called, with careful legal precision, an attempted undue influence claim. It had not succeeded, but the attempt was documented. The attorney was willing to testify, and in the context of everything else in that file, it painted a portrait of a woman who had been maneuvering for longer than anyone had realized. My father had seen it. He had just hoped, I think, that he was wrong. He was not wrong. Renata outlined 2 parallel tracks. The divorce proceedings, filed on grounds that included financial misconduct, with a full forensic accounting requested from day one, and a separate civil consultation regarding the estate interference, which my father's attorney was prepared to support. She told me the combination was, in her experience, unusual. She told me most clients came to her with pain and very little paper. She told me I had arrived with both, and that, in her professional opinion, the paper was going to do most of the work. I asked her one question before I left that office. I asked her how long before Marcus would know. She told me he would be served within 10 days. Standard timeline. Nothing to be done about the speed, but everything to be done about the order of operations before it happened. She needed certain financial protections in place first, certain accounts flagged, certain assets documented in their current state so nothing could be moved, liquidated, or conveniently misplaced in the window between filing and service. 10 days. I went home that evening and made pasta. The good kind, the kind that takes time, that requires standing at the stove and paying attention. Marcus came home at 6:15 and said it smelled incredible and poured himself a glass of wine and asked about my day. I told him it was fine, busy, the usual. He kissed me on the cheek before he sat down. I have thought about that kiss many times since. Not with grief, I want to be clear about that. I moved through grief in those 79 days, quietly, in pieces, mostly in my car where no one could see it. What I felt in that moment, standing at my own stove with his kiss cooling on my cheek, was something closer to clarity. The specific, crystalline calm of a woman who knows exactly where she is standing and has already decided what comes next. I called my mother on Sunday. Like always, she asked how Marcus was. I told her he seemed well. She made a small sound that she probably believed was neutral, and I now understood was the sound of a woman managing her own guilt in real time. I asked about her garden. She told me the roses were coming back. I told her I was glad. I told her I loved her before I hung up. The service papers reached Marcus on a Thursday morning. I had taken the day off work, not because I needed to witness it. I already knew what was in them, but because I had spent 79 days being steady for an audience that didn't deserve it. And I thought I had earned the right to sit in my own living room on a Thursday morning and simply exist in the truth. The process server knocked at 9:47. Marcus opened the door in the way of a man who was not expecting anything. Loose, unhurried, the particular ease of someone who has decided the dangerous part is behind him. I heard the door. I heard the brief exchange. I heard the sound of the door closing. And then a silence that had a different quality than any silence in that house before it. He came into the living room holding the envelope the way you hold something whose weight you don't yet understand. He looked at me sitting in the chair I had chosen deliberately. Good posture, both feet on the floor, hands in my lap. And I watched the understanding move across his face in stages. First confusion, then the beginning of the calculation. How much does she know? then the calculation collapsing as he registered my expression, which was not angry, not devastated, not any of the things he had presumably prepared for. I was calm, the particular calm of a woman who has already won and is simply waiting for the other person to understand the score. He said my name, just my name, the way people say it when they don't yet have a sentence to follow it with. I let him stand there for a moment with it, and then I said, very quietly, the only thing I had planned to say in that room on that morning. I went back for my laptop, Marcus. That Tuesday in March, I went back for my laptop.
I watched him understand. I watched 11 years rearrange themselves behind his eyes into their true shape. Not the shape he had presented to me, not the shape I had accepted, but the actual architecture of what our marriage had been. I watched him understand that every Saturday morning was accounted for. Every transfer, every contact labeled with a single letter, every Sunday phone call I had made with a steady voice while building the file that was currently in Renata's office with his name on 61 pages of it. He sat down on the couch, heavily, the way men sit when the thing they have been holding up finally drops. I stood up, picked up my bag, and I said one more thing before I walked out of that living room for the last time as his wife. I said, "She's going to need a good attorney, too." There is a particular mercy in the legal process that I did not expect. It is slow, deliberately, almost philosophically slow. And in that slowness, in the months of filings and responses and forensic accountants and depositions, there is a strange gift for the person who has already done their grieving in advance. Because while Marcus and Patricia were just beginning to understand the shape of what they were facing, I had already lived through the worst of it. Alone, in pieces, in a car, in an encrypted folder on a cache laptop. By the time the proceedings began in earnest, I was not a woman in crisis. I was a woman with a timeline and a very organized attorney. The forensic accounting took 11 weeks. What it surfaced, beyond the transfers I had already documented, were 3 additional accounts I had not known existed. One in Marcus's name alone, opened 14 months prior, the same month the Saturday visits began. One in a business name I did not recognize, which turned out to be a shell registered to an address that was, upon further examination, my mother's house. And one joint account. A joint account, opened 9 months into the affair. Both their names. A future being quietly, methodically constructed inside the infrastructure of my present life. They had not simply been betraying me. They had been building towards something. A horizon they believed I would never see coming because they had decided between themselves that I was manageable, that my loyalty was permanent, that my love for both of them was a resource they could extract indefinitely without consequence. They had mistaken my grace for blindness. The joint account changed the legal calculus in ways that Renata described in her careful professional language as significantly favorable, because it demonstrated not just dissipation of marital assets, but coordinated financial planning, which in our state elevated the misconduct from a mitigating factor to a primary one. The settlement negotiations, when they finally began, did not look the way Marcus had presumably imagined they would. He had imagined, I think, that I would be too devastated to be dangerous. He had imagined tears and recriminations and the kind of emotional chaos that obscures strategy. He had imagined a woman undone. He got a project manager with 61 pages and a forensic accountant who had found 3 accounts he thought were invisible. The settlement took 4 months to finalize. I will not recite every provision. That is not the point of this story, and frankly, some of it is still subject to confidentiality. What I will tell you is this. I left that marriage with the house, a financial settlement that reflected the full documented value of what had been moved without my consent, and a clause, Renata's particular contribution, and the one I am most proud of, requiring that any future cohabitation between Marcus and a direct family member of mine trigger an immediate financial penalty. We named it specifically, in the document, by relationship. Renata said she had never drafted that clause before. She said she hoped never to need to again. She said it with the particular warmth of a woman who has seen everything and still occasionally encounters something new. My mother did not fare the way she had planned. The estate matter, her post-funeral attempt to alter my father's will, documented by his attorney and supported by those careful notes, did not result in criminal charges. I want to be precise about that. What it resulted in was a civil proceeding that my father's attorney pursued with the quiet tenacity of a man who had been waiting, I think, for someone to ask him to. The attempt had failed at the time she made it, but the attempt was now on record. And in the context of the joint account, the financial transfers, the full documented portrait of what she and Marcus had been constructing, the civil matter settled in my favor. The protected distribution my father had built for me, the one she had tried to redirect, was released to me in full, with interest because of the delay the proceeding had created. My father protected me, even after he was gone, even against her, especially against her. I have thought about that a great deal in the time since, about what he knew and how he knew it, and why he never said it plainly. I think he believed, the way long-married people believe things they cannot prove, that the woman he had chosen at 24 was ultimately more than what he sometimes glimpsed in her unguarded moments. I think he hoped. And I think when the hoping became untenable, he did the only thing a precise and quietly loving man could do. He wrote it down. He had it witnessed. He locked a door she could not open. I moved back into my house in November. Not the marital house. I sold that because some spaces cannot be renovated, only released. A smaller house, mine alone, with a yard I had no particular plan for, and a kitchen with a coffee maker that belonged to no one's history but my own. I have not spoken to my mother since the civil proceeding concluded. That is not a dramatic statement. I want to be clear about that. There was no confrontation, no final phone call, no letter with everything I needed her to understand. Because I had spent 44 years waiting for my mother to be capable of the kind of accountability that would make a confrontation meaningful. And the proceedings had shown me, in the most documentary possible way, exactly who she was and had always been. Some conversations are not worth having, not because the wound is not real, but because the person on the other end of it has demonstrated comprehensively that they will not receive it honestly. And I am done spending my clarity on people who will only use it against me. That is the quietest, most devastating thing I have ever decided. And I would decide it again. Marcus, I am told, moved into her house for approximately 6 weeks before the financial penalty clause made that arrangement untenable. I do not know where he is now. I find, genuinely, that I do not need to. The roses in my mother's garden came back that spring. She mentioned it in the last conversation we ever had, like it was an ordinary thing. Like gardens keep growing regardless of what happens inside the house they surround. They do, of course. That's the thing about living things. They keep reaching toward light, even when the people tending them have stopped deserving it. I have a garden now. Small. Nothing architectural about it. I planted things I liked, not things that would impress anyone, not things that required maintenance I couldn't sustain alone. Just color. Just life. Just something that was mine to tend or neglect entirely on my own terms. It is doing remarkably well. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight. If any part of this story sat heavy in your chest, if you recognize something in the 14 months of performed normalcy, in the Sunday phone calls made with a steady voice, in the specific exhaustion of being the reliable one in a room full of people who were never reliable back, I see you. You don't have to explain it. You don't have to justify it. Some rooms were never safe. Some people were never who they presented themselves to be. And understanding that, truly understanding it, not just surviving it, is its own form of justice. If this one found you at the right moment, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below. I read every single one, and the ones on this episode, I have a feeling, are going to be something extraordinary. And if you are not subscribed yet, well, you sat through 6 segments. You know exactly what we do here. Around here, we don't just survive it. We understand it. And then, we let it go. I'll see you by the fire.